What if the reason your desire feels far away is because you keep placing it in the future? What if the secret is not to wait longer, work harder, or search for more signs, but to mentally move beyond the waiting altogether? Most people spend their lives hoping, wishing, and looking toward a future moment when everything will finally fall into place. They tell themselves that one day they will be happy, one day they will feel successful, one day they will feel secure. But as long as the desire remains in the future, the experience of fulfillment remains out of reach. Today, I want to share a powerful shift in perspective. Imagine that your desire did not happen tomorrow. Imagine it did not happen next month. Imagine it happened yesterday. How would you feel today if the dream had already come true? Would you still be anxious? Would you still be searching for evidence? Would you still be wondering when it will happen? Of course not. You would feel relief. You would feel gratitude. You would feel certainty. You would move through your day with the quiet confidence of someone who already has what they once desired. That is the secret of living from the end. It is choosing to identify with the fulfilled version of yourself now, rather than waiting for circumstances to grant you permission. So, for the next few moments, set aside your doubts, release the habit of waiting, open your mind to a new possibility, and ask yourself, what if it already happened? What if the version of you who has already succeeded is available right now? Let's begin. One of the greatest habits that keeps people separated from their desires is the habit of waiting. They wait for better circumstances. They wait for a sign. They wait for proof. They wait for some future moment when everything will finally come together. In doing so, they place their dreams on a distant horizon and spend their lives looking toward fulfillment rather than living from it. The problem is not that they have desires. The problem is that they continue identifying with the version of themselves who is still waiting. As long as you see yourself as someone who is trying to get something, you remain emotionally connected to the experience of not having it. Most people have been taught to think of success, abundance, love, and achievement as future events. They imagine these experiences existing somewhere ahead of them in time. Every day they wake up and remind themselves that what they want has not arrived yet. They measure the distance between where they are and where they want to be. They focus on what is missing. They count the days, the months, and sometimes even the years. Without realizing it, they strengthen the feeling of separation between themselves and their desire. The secret is to stop living in the state of waiting and begin occupying the end. To occupy the end means mentally and emotionally identifying with the version of yourself who has already achieved the goal. It means shifting your awareness away from the process of getting and placing it on the experience of already having. This is not about denying your current circumstances. It is about choosing a different point of view. Instead of seeing yourself as someone who hopes to become successful, you begin seeing yourself as someone who already is successful. Instead of feeling like a person searching for abundance, you begin feeling like a person who already possesses it. Think about how different your life would feel if your desire were already fulfilled. If the dream had already become reality, you would not spend your days worrying about whether it would happen. You would not constantly search for evidence. You would not feel desperate for signs. There would be a sense of relief. There would be a sense of certainty. There would be a natural confidence because the outcome would no longer be in question. These feelings reveal the state of consciousness you would occupy if your desire were already realized. Many people believe they must wait for circumstances to change before they can experience those emotions. Yet this creates a cycle that never ends. They postpone confidence until success arrives. They postpone gratitude until abundance appears. They postpone peace until their problems disappear. In reality, these states can be cultivated now. You can begin feeling the emotions of fulfillment before circumstances fully reflect them. This is what allows you to move from waiting into occupying the end. Imagine an actor stepping into a role. For the duration of the performance, the actor thinks, feels, and responds as the character. They do not constantly remind themselves that they are pretending. They fully immerse themselves in the identity they have chosen. In a similar way, occupying the end involves stepping into the identity of your fulfilled self. You begin thinking from that perspective. You begin making decisions from that perspective. You begin carrying yourself with the confidence of that perspective. One of the most powerful questions you can ask yourself is this: if my desire were already fulfilled, how would I feel today? Notice that the question is not asking what you would do someday. It is asking how you would feel now. The answer often reveals a state of peace, gratitude, certainty, and trust. These are not emotions that must wait for the future. They are emotions you can begin cultivating immediately. Of course, there will be moments when old habits attempt to pull you back into waiting. You may find yourself wondering when things will happen. You may become focused on current circumstances. You may feel tempted to measure progress by appearances. When this happens, gently return to the end. Return to the fulfilled version of yourself. Return to the feeling that it is already done. Each time you do this, you strengthen a new way of thinking. The truth is that the future does not have to remain a distant destination. You can begin experiencing the essence of it now. You can stop identifying with lack and start identifying with fulfillment. You can stop living as someone who is waiting and start living as someone who already possesses what they desire. Because the moment you occupy the end, something profound begins to change. Your thoughts become different. Your expectations become different. Your energy becomes different. And over time, the outer world begins reflecting the inner state you have chosen to embrace. So stop waiting for the future to bring you what you desire. Step into the reality of fulfillment today. Occupy the end, live from completion, and allow your life to unfold from that powerful new perspective. One of the most powerful mental shifts you can make is to assume that your desire happened yesterday. At first, this idea may seem unusual because most people are accustomed to placing their dreams somewhere in the future. They think of success as something that will happen one day. They think of abundance as something they are working toward. They think of fulfillment as a distant destination they hope to reach eventually. Because of this, they remain emotionally connected to waiting. Their thoughts constantly revolve around when it will happen, how it will happen, and whether it will happen at all. Yet the moment you assume it happened yesterday, everything changes. Imagine for a moment that the dream you have been pursuing was fulfilled yesterday. Not tomorrow, not next year, yesterday. How would you feel today? You would wake up differently. You would not begin your day wondering whether your desire was coming. You would not be searching for signs or looking for evidence. You would not be asking questions about timing. The uncertainty would be gone because the event would already be part of your experience. There would be nothing left to chase. There would be nothing left to prove. You would simply live your life from the awareness that it had already happened. Think about the emotional difference between wanting something and already having experienced it. Wanting is often accompanied by anticipation, concern, and sometimes even frustration. Having, on the other hand, creates a feeling of relief. It creates gratitude. It creates calmness. When something has already happened, you stop obsessing over it because it no longer feels distant. It becomes part of your reality. This emotional shift is one of the reasons the concept of assuming it happened yesterday is so powerful. It moves you out of the state of longing and into the state of fulfillment. Many people unknowingly keep their desires away from themselves because they continuously reinforce the idea that fulfillment belongs in the future. Every day they repeat thoughts such as, "I hope it happens soon," "maybe next month," or "I wonder when things will change." While these thoughts may seem harmless, they strengthen the feeling that the desired reality is not here yet. The mind continues operating from the assumption that fulfillment remains separate from the present moment. Assuming it happened yesterday interrupts this pattern by placing fulfillment behind you instead of ahead of you. Imagine someone who recently achieved a major goal. Perhaps they completed an important project, received exciting news, or experienced a breakthrough they had been hoping for. The day after it happens, they are no longer focused on obtaining it. Their attention shifts because the goal has already been accomplished. They carry a different energy. There is less tension. There is more confidence. There is more peace. This is the state you are invited to adopt, not because you are pretending, but because you are training yourself to identify with fulfillment rather than lack. One of the reasons this approach feels so liberating is that it removes the pressure associated with constant striving. When people remain focused on getting something, they often create resistance through worry and impatience. They become overly concerned with every detail. They analyze every circumstance. They become emotionally dependent on immediate results. But when you assume it happened yesterday, the pressure begins to dissolve. The desire no longer feels far away. It feels familiar. It feels natural. It feels integrated into your sense of self. This does not mean you stop taking action or stop pursuing meaningful goals. It means your actions are no longer driven by desperation. Instead, they are guided by confidence. You begin making choices from the perspective of someone who already trusts the outcome. Your thoughts become more aligned with possibility. Your emotions become more stable. Your expectations become more positive. Of course, there will be moments when old habits return. You may catch yourself worrying about timing. You may become focused on appearances. You may feel tempted to return to the state of waiting. Whenever this happens, gently ask yourself a simple question: how would I feel today if it had already happened yesterday? Allow the answer to guide you back to the state of fulfillment. Return to the feeling of relief. Return to gratitude. Return to certainty. The true power of this practice lies in its ability to transform your relationship with your desire. Instead of seeing it as something distant, you begin experiencing it as something already woven into your consciousness. Instead of living in anticipation, you begin living in completion. Instead of waiting for the future, you begin drawing strength from the assumption that the desired outcome is already part of your story. So stop placing your dream endlessly ahead of you. Assume it happened yesterday. Feel the relief. Feel the gratitude. Feel the certainty. Carry yourself as someone who has already experienced what they once desired. Because the more natural that state becomes, the more naturally your outer world begins to reflect it. And that is the true secret of living from the end. One of the most powerful influences in your life is something that most people rarely pay attention to: your inner conversations. Throughout the day, you are constantly talking to yourself. Sometimes the conversations are obvious, and other times they happen so quietly that you barely notice them. Yet these internal dialogues shape your beliefs, influence your emotions, and determine how you see yourself and the world around you. If you want to live from the end, one of the most important changes you can make is to ensure that your inner conversations reflect fulfillment rather than lack. Most people unknowingly use their inner conversations to reinforce the very circumstances they wish to escape. They spend their days mentally repeating stories of struggle, delay, disappointment, and limitation. They imagine conversations where they explain why things are not working. They rehearse fears about the future. They relive problems from the past. Without realizing it, they continually return to the state of wanting, hoping, and waiting. Their inner dialogue becomes a constant reminder of what they believe they do not have. Imagine someone who desires financial abundance but spends every day internally saying, "Money is hard to come by, nothing ever changes," or "I never get ahead." Even if they occasionally think positive thoughts, their dominant inner conversation continues supporting limitation. The same principle applies to every area of life. A person who desires success but constantly imagines failure, a person who desires love but continually expects rejection, or a person who desires peace but repeatedly focuses on problems is maintaining an inner dialogue that contradicts their desired reality. Living from the end requires a different approach. It requires speaking to yourself from the perspective of fulfillment. If your desire were already realized, how would your inner conversations change? What would you say to yourself if the goal had already been achieved? How would you mentally respond to daily situations? These questions are important because they help reveal the difference between thinking from lack and thinking from fulfillment. Consider a person who has already achieved a dream they once considered impossible. Their internal dialogue is naturally different from someone who is still struggling with doubt. They are not constantly asking whether it will happen because, in their mind, it already has. Their thoughts carry confidence. Their expectations are more positive. Their conversations with themselves reflect certainty rather than uncertainty. This shift in inner speech influences every aspect of their experience. One of the reasons inner conversations are so powerful is that they occur repeatedly. A single thought may pass quickly, but a conversation that repeats day after day gradually becomes a belief. Over time, what you consistently tell yourself begins feeling true. This is why it is so important to become aware of the stories you are telling yourself. If those stories are rooted in fear, they strengthen fear. If they are rooted in confidence, they strengthen confidence. Imagine waking up each morning and mentally speaking from the reality you desire. Instead of saying, "I hope things improve," you begin thinking, "Everything is unfolding perfectly." Instead of asking, "When will my breakthrough come?" you begin affirming, "I am grateful that things are already moving in my favor." Instead of focusing on obstacles, you begin focusing on possibilities. These may seem like small changes, but they create a profound shift in consciousness over time. Another important aspect of inner conversations is emotional tone. It is not enough to simply repeat words. The feeling behind those words matters. Conversations that reflect fulfillment carry a sense of calmness, gratitude, and certainty. They feel different from conversations rooted in desperation or fear. When you speak internally from a place of fulfillment, you begin experiencing the emotional state of someone who already possesses what they desire. Of course, changing inner conversations requires awareness and practice. Old habits may attempt to return. You may catch yourself replaying worries or imagining negative outcomes. When this happens, do not become discouraged. Simply redirect the conversation. Replace fear with confidence. Replace doubt with possibility. Replace limitation with fulfillment. Every time you do this, you strengthen a new pattern of thinking. Think of your inner conversations as rehearsals for the life you are creating. If you continually rehearse struggle, struggle feels familiar. If you continually rehearse success, success begins feeling natural. The mind responds to what is repeated. The more consistently you speak from fulfillment, the more natural fulfillment becomes. So pay attention to the conversations happening within you. Listen to the stories you tell yourself. Notice whether they reflect the reality you desire or the reality you wish to leave behind. Then make a conscious choice to speak from the end. Let your inner conversations reflect gratitude instead of longing, confidence instead of fear, and completion instead of waiting. Because when your inner conversations consistently reflect fulfillment, you begin identifying with the version of yourself who already has what they desire. And as that identity becomes stronger, the outer world gradually begins to mirror the inner reality you have chosen to embrace. One of the most important lessons on the journey of transformation is learning to refuse to return to the state of wanting. Most people spend their lives trapped in a cycle of desire. They want success, they want abundance, they want love, they want freedom, and they want change. There is nothing wrong with having desires. In fact, desire often points you toward growth and expansion. The problem begins when wanting becomes a permanent state of consciousness. When you continually identify yourself as someone who wants something, you also continue identifying yourself as someone who does not have it. The focus remains on the absence of the desire rather than its fulfillment. Think about how often people speak from the state of wanting. They say things like, "I hope it happens someday," "I wish things would change," or "maybe one day I'll achieve my goal." While these statements may seem harmless, they reinforce the idea that fulfillment exists somewhere outside the present moment. The mind becomes conditioned to expect waiting. It becomes comfortable with longing. The desire remains on a distant horizon, always visible but never fully reached. Living from the end requires a completely different approach. Instead of identifying with the version of yourself who wants the desire, you begin identifying with the version of yourself who has already experienced it. This does not mean you stop caring about your goals. It means you stop emotionally attaching yourself to the feeling of lack. You stop rehearsing the story of what is missing. You stop measuring your life by what has not yet appeared. Imagine receiving something you had wanted for a very long time. Perhaps it was a new opportunity, an achievement, or an answer to a long-held dream. Once it became yours, your relationship with it changed. You no longer spent every day wishing for it because the desire had moved from possibility into reality. The emotional tension disappeared. There was a sense of completion. There was relief. There was gratitude. This is the feeling you are invited to cultivate now, not after the desire arrives, but before. One reason people repeatedly return to the state of wanting is because they allow circumstances to dictate their emotional state. They look at current conditions and conclude that fulfillment is still far away. They check for evidence. They search for signs. They analyze every detail of their situation. If they do not see immediate progress, they slip back into waiting. They begin focusing once again on what is absent. In doing so, they unknowingly strengthen the state they are trying to leave behind. Refusing to return to wanting requires awareness. It requires recognizing when your attention has drifted back toward lack. Whenever you find yourself obsessing over what is missing, pause and ask yourself, am I thinking like someone who already has what they desire, or am I thinking like someone who is still waiting? This simple question can reveal a great deal about your current state of consciousness. The truth is that fulfillment feels different from wanting. Wanting often carries urgency, anxiety, and impatience. Fulfillment carries calmness, confidence, and certainty. A person who already possesses something valuable does not spend all day worrying about whether it belongs to them. They naturally assume ownership. In the same way, when you begin identifying with fulfillment, your emotional state changes. You become less reactive. You become less dependent on immediate evidence. You begin trusting the reality you have chosen internally. This shift does not happen because you force yourself to ignore life. It happens because you choose a different perspective. You stop viewing yourself as someone trying to achieve fulfillment and start viewing yourself as someone living from fulfillment. The more often you return to this perspective, the more natural it becomes. There will be moments when old habits attempt to reappear. Doubt may surface, fear may arise, circumstances may seem to contradict your vision. During those times, it is tempting to fall back into wanting. Yet every time you consciously return to fulfillment, you strengthen a new identity. You remind yourself that temporary appearances do not determine your future. You remind yourself that your role is not to constantly want, but to consistently embody the state of completion. The goal is not to eliminate desire. The goal is to eliminate the feeling that your happiness, confidence, or peace depends on something outside of you. True transformation occurs when you no longer feel separated from your desired reality. It occurs when fulfillment becomes your natural state rather than something reserved for the future. So refuse to return to the state of wanting. Refuse to spend your days rehearsing lack. Refuse to define yourself by what is missing. Instead, return again and again to the feeling of completion. Return to gratitude. Return to certainty. Return to the awareness that the fulfilled version of yourself already exists within you. Because the more consistently you remain in that state, the more natural it becomes. And what becomes natural within eventually finds expression without. That is why you must refuse to return to wanting and choose instead to live from the reality that it is already done. The final and perhaps most important step in living from the end is persistence. It is not enough to visit the state of fulfillment occasionally and then return to doubt when circumstances appear challenging. The real transformation happens when you persist in the feeling of fulfillment until it becomes natural. This is where many people stop too soon. They experience a moment of inspiration, feel confident for a day or two, and then allow old habits of thinking to pull them back into fear, worry, and uncertainty. Yet lasting change requires consistency. It requires remaining faithful to the new state long enough for it to become your dominant way of being. Think about any skill you have ever learned. In the beginning, it may have felt awkward or unfamiliar. Whether it was learning to drive, learning a language, or developing a new habit, the process required repetition. At first you had to think about every step, but over time through consistent practice, what once felt difficult became natural. The same principle applies to your assumptions about yourself and your life. If you have spent years identifying with limitation, struggle, or waiting, the feeling of fulfillment may initially seem unfamiliar. That does not mean it is wrong, it simply means it is new. Most people underestimate the power of familiarity. The mind naturally gravitates toward what feels normal. Even when old patterns are unhelpful, they can feel comfortable because they are familiar. This is why some people repeatedly return to worry even when they want peace, or return to doubt even when they desire confidence. Their old state feels natural because they have practiced it for so long. The key is to make fulfillment feel just as familiar. Imagine that your desire has already been realized. How would you think? How would you feel? How would you respond to everyday situations? These questions help you connect with the version of yourself who already possesses what you desire. The more often you return to this state, the more natural it becomes. At first, it may require conscious effort. You may need to remind yourself repeatedly. You may need to redirect your attention whenever it drifts back toward lack. Yet each time you do, you strengthen the new state. Persistence is important because circumstances do not always change immediately. There may be periods when the outer world appears unchanged. This is often where people become discouraged. They assume that because results are not visible, their efforts are ineffective. Yet the absence of immediate evidence does not mean the absence of progress. Some of the most significant changes occur internally before they become visible externally. Your beliefs are shifting. Your expectations are evolving. Your self-concept is transforming. These changes create the foundation for future experiences. Think of a gardener planting seeds. After planting, the gardener does not dig up the soil every day to check whether growth is occurring. They trust the process. They continue providing water, sunlight, and care. They understand that growth takes place beneath the surface before it becomes visible above the ground. In the same way, persistence requires trusting the unseen process. It requires continuing to nurture the feeling of fulfillment even when external confirmation has not yet appeared. One of the signs that fulfillment is becoming natural is a growing sense of ease. You stop feeling desperate. You stop obsessing over timing. You stop constantly searching for signs. Instead, there is a quiet confidence. The desire no longer feels distant because it feels real within you. This inner certainty is powerful because it changes the way you move through life. Your actions become more aligned, your decisions become clearer, your expectations become more positive. As we come to the end of this message, remember this simple but powerful truth. You do not become the fulfilled version of yourself after the desire appears. The desire appears after you become the fulfilled version of yourself. The world teaches you to wait for evidence before you believe. It teaches you to let circumstances determine your feelings. It teaches you to place your happiness, confidence, and peace somewhere in the future. But true transformation begins when you reverse that process, when you stop waiting, when you stop chasing, when you stop identifying with the version of yourself who is still hoping and searching. And instead, you begin living from the assumption that it is already done. Assume it happened yesterday. Carry yourself with the confidence of completion. Think from fulfillment. Feel from fulfillment. Speak from fulfillment. Let your inner world reflect the reality you desire before your outer world confirms it. Because the more natural fulfillment becomes within you, the more naturally life begins reflecting it around you. So leave this message with a new perspective. Stop asking when it will happen. Start asking who you would be if it already had. And then become that person now. The future changes the moment you stop living for it and start living from it. Assume it happened yesterday, and watch how differently you experience today. Thank you for spending this time with me today. If this message inspired you, encouraged you, or helped you see your desires from a new perspective, please support the channel by liking this video, subscribing, and sharing it with someone who needs this reminder. And in the comments below, write, "It already happened. I live from the end." Let those words become more than a comment. Let them become a new way of thinking, a new way of feeling, a new way of living. Thank you for your support, your presence, and your belief in what is possible. Until next time, continue to think from fulfillment, continue to trust the unseen, and continue to live as the version of yourself who already has what they desire. Take care, and I'll see you in the next